No, I agree. I think boobs help.
Definitely.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they've certainly helped me.
In all spaces.
Pretty much.
But yeah, we should probably...
Oh, are we recording?
Hi. Yeah, we're recording. Go ahead.
So you might have noticed the glasses. No one gave me the memo.
Technically, we didn't have anything set up either. This was just because we are all sporadic and beautiful people who are on the same level. That's all. Sorry. But your hair matches.
And in all fairness, the great and powerful heathen queen, you have pink hair, so we have to get on your level somehow.
Yeah.
And we can't obstruct that beautiful face.
I was informed this week that I am a cult leader. I did not know this. I know, thank you. I am so honored and privileged to be
promotion.
I know.
Did I get an invite? Is it in the mail or?
Yeah, like I didn't know I was a cult leader, so like I didn't have a time to like work out like dues or field trips or like clergy. But I will be sending some very fancy invitations out, probably, to all of you wonderful people.
As long as we meet in a field somewhere at night, I'm set. I'm happy.
You can come worship at the Church of Fuck Around and Find Out. Anyway, moving right on with our show.
Hello.
Take it away.
All right. So, hi, everyone. We have a wonderful guest today here at the Unholy Trini-tea. We have our normal hosts, the Queen of Heathens herself, Jegaysus, King of Queens, or Queen of Kings.
King of Queens. Queen of Kings. That's all good.
and myself, the Red Sage. We have a special guest here, Jo. Jo, will you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes, I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm also excited that I had glasses that match the vibe. So I feel like I belong, like so effortlessly. It's perfect. But my name is Jo Luehmann. I am Colombian, and I moved to the United States in 2006 to get my master's in ministry and divinity. Nope, ministry and theology. I always say the other thing. And I worked inside of churches for about 10 years and then left angry. And I'm still angry, but I use that anger to do the public work that I do, which is to speak about systems of oppression, decolonizing theology, and moving the world toward heaven on earth. So that's just me in a nutshell. I also have 4 children, and I have a partner, and I live in San Diego, which makes my life really wonderful.
Aww.
San Diego is beautiful.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
So you said that you were part of the church, you left angry, and now you teach on systems of oppression.
Yes.
Granted, I have not checked my emails today, but how does the church and oppression overlap exactly? Like, has something happened recently that we should all know about? Like,
it's not all throughout history or anything. Just the last 1700 years. It's not. Like, it hasn't always, just in the last 1700 years, we have had oppression from misogyny to anti-Semitism to homophobia, queerphobia to racism, horrific racism. And that's funny because every time I say racism, people are like, but Jesus wasn't brown. But Jesus was brown. Yes, exactly. Look at the pictures in all of your churches.
It's like you ran right into the point.
Yes, exactly.
Like, yeah.
Why does every painting of Jesus look like Ewan McGregor if he was trying to be Michael Bolton? Why is that?
Well, to be fair, they have multiple ethnicity Jesuses, right? Because every region that has their depictions of Jesus, it'll kind of match that ethnicity there. Like, you have, like, an Asian personified Jesus. You do have a Latin personified Jesus. So I guess there's just a lot of Michael Bolton, cheesy-ass looking Europeans.
Which makes it really interesting to consider that in such an international nation, in such a multi-ethnic nation like America, the de facto Jesus is white. So we've decided regionally, nationally.
It's Eddie Vedder. Eddie Vedder Jesus.
So we have oppression in the church. Oppression has happened. You guys have at some point in time, according to Jo here, the past 1700 years. So no big deal. But you also said that you talked about bringing heaven to earth, which I know from liberationist theology. That's like a big liberation theology thing, and that's something that you have a background in as well. Would you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So, a lot of people think that, because see, I wasn't raised a Christian. Obviously, there is Christian hegemony, which means that Christianity is hegemonic. It's in everywhere in the West. Even when you're not a Christian, you're submerged into Christian ideology. So I wasn't raised a Christian, but I was raised in Colombia. That is a Catholic country with a lot of Catholic ideologies. And for those of you who are still under a lot of evangelical influence, Catholics are Christians. Even though evangelicals chose not to accept them into the fold. But so a lot of ideologies of Christianity are the things that I grew up believing. And anybody that has grown up in the West has been submerged in these Christian ideologies. And then I became a Christian as a teenager. And the reason why a lot of the evangelical ideologies were attractive to me was because I have always, since I was a little girl, been very interested in, making the world a better place. And when I was little, I wanted to be the first female president. That's what I would call myself, the first female president of Colombia. That was really cute. And then I wanted to be a journalist because I wanted to write stories about people that nobody's writing stories about. And that's what I wanted to do. And so this framework that was all about like bringing people Jesus, but the way I saw it was in a good way, like bringing people Jesus so that they can have better lives, so that they can be better. That was attractive to me as a 14-year-old. And the thing is, I took it very seriously, and I started, because I take everything very seriously. I am not good. Like, food is taken very seriously, jokes are taken very seriously, everything is very serious in my life. Like, I'm very intense like that. So I started reading the Bible and studying the Bible, and I could see, like, my most favorite books of the Bible are both Genesis and all the minor prophets. And you read the minor prophets, or you read the stories in Genesis, and what you're reading is the stories of liberation. You're reading stories of people being invited to let go of oppression, people being invited to look at things in a different way, to not oppress, to not fight for power, to not fight for wanting to be better than. And those things were so attractive to me. And then I started looking beyond that, and that narrative has been inside of the church for always. There is always, Christianity that's why I said 1,700 years and not 2,000 years. For the first 300 years, when Christianity was in the hands of oppressed people, Christianity was a beautiful, it had, obviously, like everything, it had problems, right? A lot of anti-Semitism in there. But Christianity had these beautiful ideologies of, we're going to stand against oppression, we're going to stand against empires, and for those of us who are oppressed, we are going to have this framework that is going to allow for us to believe that we are more than the oppression that we've been dealt. We are more than what oppressors tell us that we are. And that has been a reality of Christianity since. It's just not the only reality of Christianity. There is also the reality of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it's very much. Yeah, it's very much, and we've talked about this before on the show, been utilized and sort of rebuilt as its own empire. Mm-hmm. And so then it seeks the power structures that it claims to want to subvert, right? We have these secular power structures that are doing harm. And so in their version of a polemic is, okay, well, we're going to fix that by getting power and doing it our way. When in reality, like, all you're doing is replacing one with the other. You're just taking one empire and replacing it with yours. And honestly, I think like Christian nationalism is far more dangerous than our regular secular government. Secular, but
right. And
obviously,
I would agree that like the one thing that we can say, so like I have my beefs against the way that people criticize Christianity sometimes, because I think there's plenty of good criticisms of Christianity that need to be upheld. Very frankly, but sometimes I think we get our criticisms wrong. But I think that one right there is absolutely spot on. And one of the reasons that Christian nationalism is so dangerous is because this Christian ideology, this Christian like framework that has been existing in the West for so long is so powerful. It connects us. Religion has this immovable power to connect us to an ancestral people, connect us to a community that we're in right now, and help us see a future, regardless what branch of Christianity you're looking at. And when political professionals decide to tap into that reality to tie us to a historical narrative, a present people, and a future, and use religion like that, in this case specifically Christianity, it's very effective. Because all you have to do is change its goals. You just change it from being something where there is a freedom to come to there is an elected official that is the freedom to come. And that is all it takes.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like when people say that Christianity is just all nonsense, people that have left Christianity, people that are angry, and let me be clear, rightfully angry at Christianity. The proof that it's not nonsense is how powerful it is. It's actually an incredible, powerful tool or weapon. It depends on whose hands you have it. And one of the biggest proofs for me of that is the fact that the slave Bible, 90% of the Old Testament in the slave Bible was removed, and 50% of the New Testament was removed. And the reason for that is because it would lead to liberation. It would lead to people that were enslaved to be liberated and inspired by the narratives that were found in this book. So they had to remove all of these inspirational narratives and give them this Bible that was watered down, whitewashed, and it became, it's then the weapon, right? And I was going to say something from earlier. The Heathen Queen said something, and these are like, can you even blame Christians? For 300 years, and I'm not giving excuses at all. There is no excuse to be an abuser. There is none, especially after 1700 years. However, 300 years of horrific oppression, 300 years of them being boiled in oil, throwing people in boiling oil, burning people, killing people, torturing people for being Christians. 300 years. Same things with, Jewish people. 300 years of that. And then there is this emperor who says, I am giving you power. I want to give you power. And the only ethical thing to say is no thanks. Because there is nothing good that you can offer me that will not make me the oppressor. But after 300 years of horrific oppression, how can they not say yes to get a respite from their oppression? To get a little breathing room, to believe that maybe we can create something better. They couldn't. Because, the moment that you make peace with power, it's the moment that you become the oppressor yourself. The moment that they are okay with saying the Roman Empire is going to be a Christian nation and anybody else is going to be considered to be wrong, everything goes wrong from that moment on. But at the same time, I can see this desperation to not be oppressed anymore. And that is the same invitation that is given to everybody today. How much it's the problem with white feminism today. Because white women are told by supremacy, by patriarchy, we're going to give you just a little bit of power if only you just decide to be like us. If only you sell your soul and betray other women for the sake of you being the one group of women that will not be oppressed anymore inside of this. It's a lie. They will still be oppressed, but white women have taken the bait.
Yeah.
White women have. And gay men have done the same. Gay white men have done the same thing. And men of color have done the same thing. Because if you are, the closer you get to power, the more that your entire nervous system is not even conscious. Your nervous system is going for survival. And sometimes survival looks like selling your soul to the empire. And that's really sad.
I was going to say that too when we were talking about it, because you see this flip happen, and it again is about who the power lies with, and it's in what hands they are. So for the first 300 years, you have this oppressive group using the text for very good reasons in terms of keeping themselves alive, giving themselves hope, making sure that they don't become extinct as as a ethnicity. And then as soon as that power dynamic flips and it becomes part of the Roman Catholic Church and it becomes part of the empire, the same exact words are used to hold that position of power. They're used to subject people to all their rule. And I was going to say too, it happens the same with people who have money. You see that if somebody was growing up in a very hard life, hard times, maybe they're on and off the streets, but then they become successful. It's almost as if they hold on to that money so much harder because they know where they once were, and they don't necessarily give it back and help other people. Some do, but they're not usually helping to uplift the other homeless community because they're so scared of going back to that position. So it makes sense, but it's something that we all have to be cognizant of. And as soon as we let that go, we start having other problems like fake persecution complexes, where the Christian nationalists think they're under attack because the words remain the same and they forgot how to apply them.
Yeah. So just as a quick sort of, sorry, I will let you talk in 1 second. I just wanted to make a quick note. So like, I trust that Jo knows more than I do. I've been reading this really interesting book by Candida Moss called The Myth of Persecution. And it takes a very like historical look at what was actually going on in the sort of early years of Christianity. And it certainly doesn't take the position that there wasn't persecution. Just that like the evidence would suggest that it was perhaps not as widespread or as intense or as like regular as Christians would have you believe. And I think there's certainly good reason that like, you know, in that time and place, if you saw instances of persecution and they're all against your people group of whatever kind, it's very easy to then think it's much more widespread, right? Or something like that. Or when you have the church fathers then reading backwards and like sort of spinning a narrative based on sort of data points that might not be as numerous as one might think.
And they're known to exaggerate.
Yeah. And so that's not like, I think Jo is spot on. I just wanted to throw that book out there for anybody that's interested, because I found it really interesting to sort of get like a historian's viewpoint on like, were there actually any laws? What were the laws? When were they put into place? Like, what were Christians actually being brought in for? And that's not to say that like, that you can't be brought in for something that's not you being a Christian specifically, but somebody knew you were a Christian and turned you in for something else, right? So like that is very possible too. And I think that happened, and we saw that with like the Great Fire, Nero, all of that stuff. But yeah, anyway, I just wanted to throw that book out there.
I still need to read that book because we haven't talked. You're ahead of me once again, Queen of Heathens, in this like reading of awesome things. But it is interesting. We don't talk enough about this concept that we hear a lot in what is called Jungian psychology, which is narrative reality. This idea that the stories that we hear, but also the stories that we come from, shape how we interpret our world, right? And the earliest Christians, being Jewish people, have a very specific relationship with the temple and empire. And in a second, Jo, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to define some of these terms that we keep throwing around, like empire. Like, what even is the empire? But I just want to do this real quick. When we see these Jewish converts to Christianity, predominantly Jewish people, having a now slightly more combative relationship with the temple and a slightly more combative relationship with empire, it exacerbates their historical narrative. And I think it would be, I think that what we are dealing with is a story that was a historical narrative that was then taken by empire and used in a specific way to talk about how the underdogs are now the heroes and the leaders, which is a subversion of the true story of this ethnic people group for the purpose of talking about, well, now you get your shot to be in charge, which I think is what Jo was speaking about as well. I think the third thing, because like I think you were correct. Go.
No, you're absolutely correct. Because see, the narrative that we've been given is Christians were persecuted, but inside of the empire, everyone was persecuted, not Christians alone. You know, and so that is the difference. That the story has been Christians were persecuted, everybody else was too. Everybody was persecuted. And in fact, when Christians stopped being persecuted, they continued to persecute everybody else. The persecution of Jewish people didn't stop. In fact, the persecution of Jewish people began well before that and continues to be till today. And so that's the problem with the narrative, that the stories, Christians were having such a hard time. They were, and so was everybody else. So was everybody else inside of the empire. Just like today, while people might think that white people have it better, they don't. You know? Poor white people are not doing, I mean, they are doing a little bit better, but are they persecuted too? Yes, absolutely. Are they harmed too? Yes, absolutely. Capitalism persecutes and oppresses and harms everybody who is not the elites. And so that's the narrative, right? The narrative is the most persecuted, the ones that were suffering the most, the ones that were in the worst of places were Christians. That is an inaccurate narrative. That is not true whatsoever. Inside of the Roman Empire, a lot of people were persecuted, including Christians, but absolutely not limited to Christians, or the ones that were receiving the worst persecution were certainly not Christians either. So thank you for making that clarification, because it is important because of the narratives that we've been told, because of the stories that we've all been told.
And to sort of piggyback on what Andrew was saying, I'm sure a lot of our listeners know this, but I think like maybe it's worth saying again. In 70, the temple was destroyed. And the temple wasn't just destroyed, it was like wiped out. People were killed. The inside of Jerusalem was gone, right? And like this is the most important place to Jewish folks. So they are already feeling incredibly persecuted, which they were, and incredibly harmed. And so if you're taking people from that position, and some of them are then converting to Christianity, like this is the place that they're coming from, right? Like their roots in Judaism effectively have just been wiped off the face of the earth, and family members killed, and really the Roman Empire stomped them out at that time. And so I just wanted to add that on to what Andrew was saying, because the persecution was, I mean, when we say that, sometimes I think we're like, yeah, they were persecuted, but we don't actually think about how it was done and how that would then make people feel. Because it's really easy to say like, no, they were persecuted. Like, yeah, that's too bad. But like, think about living somewhere, having it be your most holy place. You literally think God exists in that building. You do all your sacrifices there. Like, this is the center of your life. And a foreign power wipes it off the face of the earth. And now you're forced to live within that empire. It will do something to you, right?
Right.
Especially,
I think that it's important. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
And what fucks me up about that story that happens in 70 AD is this happens after the abomination of desolation by Antiochus, where he brings a pig being an unclean animal, slaughters it in the Holy of Holies, where only priests can go. And that happened in the intertestamental period, right? And then we go back to the Babylonian exile, and they had their temple destroyed then too. Where their temple was destroyed then, they didn't just have their temple destroyed, they had their children killed, they had their wives assaulted, they had their names taken from them and given Babylonian names, and they were taken away from their homelands, like a complete cultural genocide.
Yeah.
And so everyone that would have experienced what happened in 70 AD, 70 CE, would have heard and known the stories of when pigs were slaughtered in their temple, and would have heard and known the stories of when their temple was destroyed. And so,
yeah. So I just wanted to jump in and say that the Antiochus slaughtering the pig in the Holy of Holies was after the Maccabean revolt, so that was several hundred years previous. And then in 70, when the Romans destroyed it, that would have been their history, their, I would argue, still an open wound, because this redemption that's supposed to come isn't coming, and they keep being put under foreign powers. And they feel like they're doing all the things they're supposed to do according to God, and this is still happening over and over and over again. So not only do you have this incredibly painful memory, cultural memory, in history, you are also feeling, I would imagine, abandoned. Like, how many times can you be subjugated and trying to do all the right things and believing that like you're going to be redeemed at some point, and then just keep getting kind of destroyed? Like, you have to start feeling just despair, and despair and anger together are incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It's a long history of Jewish genocide.
And that's all of the narratives of apocalyptic Jewish books, right? All of the, where the hell are you? Like, where the hell are you? Where this anger, this like very real anger. But I wanted to say something before that. Oh yeah, if you are reading anything about Christianity from the beginning, like the first 200 years, the first 100 years even, and don't understand all of this history, then you don't understand what these Christian authors were writing, right? If you have extrapolated completely that reality, you are not understanding what they are talking about. An American, a U.S. American, a U.S. American that has always lived in the West, that is living in white skin, that is middle class, has no idea what Jewish apocalyptic literature is talking about. It has no idea what it feels like in your bones to be oppressed. It doesn't even understand the things that Jesus is talking about, because they cannot even relate in the same way. And the problem with all of this is that a lot of when you're talking about what happened in 70 CE, a lot of these people have not only the memory of that, the stories have been told. On top of that, they also have the genetic reality in their bodies, right? Because trauma is passed down through your DNA. So they have the genetic reality of their oppression in their bodies. And then you have a whole bunch of Gentiles that are converting and hearing all of these stories. And the problem is that because the majority of Christians were actual Gentiles, not Jewish people. But they are hearing the stories, and they are Gentiles who were too oppressed in different ways, but they were oppressed as well by the Roman Empire. And so these Jewish narratives, they are Jewish narratives, not Christian narratives. These Jewish narratives offer for people that are Gentiles, and they say, now you can be welcomed into these narratives that help you understand liberation. There is liberation for you too. And that's the invitation. The invitation is not, all of us are sinners and there's a dude and he died and now you don't have to go to hell, no worries. No, these people are feeling oppression in their bodies. And there is these Jewish narratives that are so beautiful, that offer some sort of hope and that offer some sort of connection with other human beings. And there are these people that are saying, we welcome you into these narratives too. You can be a part of these narratives too. And in those narratives, you will also find liberation, and you will also find a respite from all of the oppression that you're experiencing. But then you remove all of that. You make Christianity the most powerful enterprise in the Western world. And then you tell people like, hey, you have to change the narrative. It's mandatory. And then you have to say, well, what we're being saved from is not the oppression of the empire, because they are the empire. But what you're being saved from now is the sin that is inside of you. And then it loses all of its meaning and all of its power, and Judaism is nowhere in there. Nowhere. You cannot find a shred of Judaism in any of those narratives, because being saved from a hell has nothing to do with being saved from the reality of your oppression here and now that you're experiencing in your body. And that's why marginalized people continue to connect to spirituality at higher rates than white, cisgender, heterosexual folks.
I want to, that's incredible. And you just hit on some hot buttons for me that I want to circle back to, but I want to backtrack to something from earlier. We keep using these words like oppression and empire and like all this kind of rhetoric that I think everyone in this room understands, but I don't necessarily think that all of our listeners have had someone sit down and say, when we talk about empire, here's what we mean. So, Jo, would you mind just giving us a quick crash course? When you say empire, why do you say it, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so an empire is just a political territory. It's a political group that moves and takes over territory and exerts power over different groups and over different territories around it. So that's what an empire is. Even though, and the empires have evolved over time. So we talk about the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was literally moving through the world, moving through Europe, and taking over lands and making them be under the authority of Rome, of the Romans. So Judea at the time was under the procurate, I can't say words, but at the time, Judea was under a Roman person, basically. So the Roman people...
It was under a Roman proconsul.
Yes. So and that's what an empire is. They move through the world and they take over land and they say, now you're going to be part of this empire and the land is ours, the rules are ours, we're going to determine how things are being done. And so empires have evolved and changed. That's exactly what the British Empire did too. That's what a lot of the different European empires did, just moved. They came over to what we call America today and took over land and they said this is going to be ours. So we have Spanish Empire, Portuguese empires, the British Empire, which was the largest empire we've had in the history, and now empires have evolved. So the U.S. is an empire that is much more evolved than any of those empires. The U.S. doesn't put its name over people. It doesn't put its protection either. It doesn't demand official taxes overtly, but it continues to exert its power over a lot of the West, especially the global Southwest. So yeah, an empire is exactly that, just exerting power over territories that are not necessarily yours. A political unit that exerts power over territories.
And I think for those that might not be aware, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting, but I feel like some of this is like good contextual stuff. This whole thing of Judea becoming under the rule of a Roman proconsul was happening right around the time Jesus was born. This is when all of this started to happen, right? Before they had the Herods on the throne. And yes, they paid taxes to Rome, but actually they paid taxes to Herod. And then Herod went ahead and gave whatever tax to Rome. And so after Herod died, his sons, one of his sons ended up being deposed. And that's when Rome said, okay, enough. And they sent in Quirinius, who was a proconsul from Syria. And the reason they had this census then was because they wanted to figure out how much tax they were going to extract. And so they needed to census everyone to figure out the taxes, because before they just paid taxes to Herod, and Herod then forwarded on the money. So it's also important to know that this, like, coming under the Roman Empire, which is something that Jewish folks didn't want, was happening right at the time that Jesus is born, right? And then he's growing up in this sort of environment.
Question. I thought the census has never been confirmed to actually have even taken place.
So I read a book on the Herods, and that was their reasoning for the census. I don't know if it's ever been necessarily confirmed. I think the idea that they all went to their homelands is not it.
Well, yeah, not that.
But I think also what might have happened was that Quirinius had to figure out these tax situations, and it got written down as a census. But that was sort of the general, I think for ease of use, they just sort of said, like, this is what that, like, calling of people was.
But that context matters, because then it frames the conversations that Jesus is having even, right? Because we're talking about, like, this was the reality that he was living under, and therefore the conversations that we're having, or he's having, with other people are not conversations from power, but conversations completely from being oppressed in an area that was oppressed by an empire.
So Jo, you have this wide and vast education around oppression and empire and liberation. Like, for those that are listening that aren't aware that there are schools of thought around the liberation theology of Christianity, what even are these things? Like, what is liberation theology?
So liberation theology is an approach to theology that is Christian in nature. That started in Latin America around the 60s, 70s. It started taking more and more power, and it was around a lot of different priests that were Catholic priests in Latin America, a lot of Jesuit priests too, that were talking about the different ways in which Christianity is actually a theology for the poor. So they were talking about the poor, and they were saying that if all of our work is not centering the poor, and they were talking about the poor as the literal poor, because we know that evangelicals changed that to be the poor in spirit, so people that don't have Christ in their framework, but it was not that. It was the actual people that are poor, people that don't have anything. And our countries, Latin American countries, were at that time, and still today, but at that time, we're suffering a lot from poverty. We're suffering a lot from the different policies that the United States had imposed in a lot of us. In the 60s, it had been 60 years since they took, and I speak from the Colombian framework because I happen to just be Colombian, but 60 years since the United States literally stole Panama from our country to be able to create the canal and be able to not have to pay taxes to be able to cross. Things like that, where they were like putting precedents all over our countries. They were setting up puppet precedents in order to be able to do whatever they wanted to do, where the war on drugs was getting more and more, they were talking more and more about the war on drugs and demonizing all of the people of the global south. And so all of these different theologians from Latin America start talking about liberation theology, and all of them are communists, and all of them are they are getting along with people like Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and they are having conversations about what does it look like to be liberated from the oppression of the United States and from the oppression of Europe. What does it look like to center the needs of the oppressed, center the needs of the poor, center the needs of all these people? And liberation theology starts garnering a lot of followers, and then a lot of these priests end up getting murdered. And they end up having to move out of countries. There is one of my favorite theologians, Camilo Torres. He had to move out of Colombia. He ends up getting murdered too. And Gustavo Gutierrez is another incredible theologian. And liberation theology is not without its problems, but it started giving a different framework for people, started thinking about this Catholicism that had been imposed on all of us, not anymore as something that we had to follow, but instead as a framework that was going to give us the right ideas to ensure that our communities are taken care of, to ensure that our people are taken care of. So that's liberation theology.
So, and I'll just say that a lot of my education in seminary was tied to liberation theology, preferential option of the poor, solidarity with the poor, like that. But I'm gonna play dumb in this question just because I think it'd be fun to hear you answer it. So, if I'm hearing you correctly, the Jewish narrative of liberation from Babylon and the Jewish and Christian narrative of liberation from Rome somehow applied to the Latin American narrative of liberation from the United States of America?
What?
How does that work?
Right. And I mean, we can go further, right? Because it applies to, we can go further. Like I said earlier, they take the slave Bible and they take out a whole bunch of different narratives from the slave Bible. And once people that were enslaved, black people that were enslaved, that were forced to become Christians, are able to get hold of these narratives, they become revolutionaries. Yeah. Revolutionaries that say, because of Christianity, because we are Christians. Because see, people love to tell me that it's not because they were Christians. Harriet Tubman was not fighting against the oppression of black people because she was a Christian. I'm like, like hell she wasn't. She absolutely was. She mentions scripture every time she has a chance. Frederick Douglass was doing the same thing. All of these different people that have been oppressed in the most horrific of ways all over, and people say, how could you be a Christian after it was used in a way to oppress you? And it was like, because I cannot hold a theology that was misused accountable for how it was misused. I hold on I hold the people accountable. But these are just narratives. These are just the stories. And the problem with holding the theology accountable, or holding the entirety of any theology that can come out of it accountable, is that you end up hating a lot of things that you are not aware of. You end up hating, black theology and womanist theology and liberation theology, not understanding that these are exactly the tools that were used by people in order to be able to be liberated themselves. We're talking about poor people that were starting revolutions in Latin America, and we're talking about enslaved people that started revolutions all over the United States because of the theology, because of Christianity. And to erase that reality is just as oppressive as telling them that they have to be Christians. It's just as oppressive. It is just as harmful to tell me that I don't get to hold on to these narratives that have led to my own liberation. Like, queer theology is stunning. And queer theology leads to the liberation of queer people all over. The reason that I feel comfortable being as queer as I am is because of theology. Is because knowing that I am made... There's one of my favorite books, if I can find it. One of my favorite
If you're going to look for books, I'm going to go find my slave Bible. I have it here somewhere. Let me see.
I'm getting my notepad ready for the book recommendation. I'm like, yes,
so
let's go.
The Black Trans Prayer book.
Black Trans Prayer book.
Yeah, the Black Trans Prayer book. This book felt so revolutionary to me. Not because, and it's not that old, it's from 2020, but not because I wasn't aware that there were, trans people that were religious, but because the way in which religion has given trans people the tools to be able to survive in a world that tells them that they don't get to was revolutionary to me. Because then I could be queer. Because then I could say, I'm not a woman. even though I am a woman, but I'm not fully a woman, and this is how God created me. And by God, I don't mean a being. I don't believe in a being, but this is how I was crafted by whatever the hell crafted humans, however the hell humans came to be. I was crafted in such a way that I am not a woman, and I am both. And this book gave me the permission almost to be able to come to peace with how I don't fit into this binary, and the binary doesn't exist. And how could it exist if there are millions and billions of stars in the world, in the universe, in the knowable universe, in the universe that we can see? There are billions and billions of stars. They are all different. They all have different lifespans. They all look different. They all move differently. And yet, I'm supposed to be the same as other 3.5 billion people in this earth. It's impossible. And it was books like these that gave me permission to feel that way. It was liberation. It was trans, queer theology that gave me permission to say, I get to be fully myself. And nobody can take that away from me, no matter how horribly the Catholic Church and the Evangelical Church and Christian nationalists and Christo-fascism exists in the world. We can hold the complexities of all of that. Christianity liberated my own queerness and also oppressed me in horrible ways and demanded that I be a woman for too long.
You make my non-binary heart happy.
So, I have a question if no one else does. I'm just chomping at the bit here. Oh, okay, I'm gonna go for it. So, I find myself feeling a tension in between two extremes with some frequency, and for the sake of argument, I'm going to label them. Well, I would actually say three extremes. The one extreme is the white nationalist conservative Christian, right? That's an extreme that I feel that exists, that pulls on my body. Another extreme would be the highly educated but predominantly white secular space. And the third space would be the educated but predominantly white progressive Christian space. And those three spaces pull on my person when I want to talk about theology. And if I were to pick a theology, it'd be one that doesn't really have a camp, and it sits in the center. That is not nationalist. It is not progressive. It is not secularist, but it is liberationist. And I feel like liberation theology and the theology of liberation does not comfortably fit in the nationalist framework, the secularist framework, or the progressive framework. And I see you agreeing with me. Would you help me navigate this?
Isn't that the whole point?
That is the whole point. But I've seen, but you're right. So and I have so many progressive Christian friends that I absolutely love and adore. But the vast majority of them are white or in white spaces, and spaces that were crafted by white people and whiteness. And the progressiveness that seems to come dead last is the economic and the ethnic liberation. The ones that seem to come first is white queer and white women. Those come first. Because these spaces are often, although very queer friendly, nary a black person in the service for these churches. Rarely a Latin American person, rarely anyone other than white people that are also voting Democrat or choosing not to vote because someone's not leftist enough, right? So I think you have felt this tension before too. Like, I think that a lot of people that look from the outside in would say the extremes are conservative nationalist Christianity and progressive Christianity, which feels to me like a white binary.
Yeah.
You would consider yourself something different, Jo. Why would you distance yourself from those two categories?
Before that, and I'll answer that happily, but before that, I do want to mention that secularism is Christianity too. It's just atheist Christianity. Secularism doesn't really exist outside of Christian narratives. You ask a Jewish person what secular means, and they are like, we don't have secular spaces. Secular doesn't exist. Secular is just a Christian idea of anything that's not Christian. Anything that's not Christian is secular, which means it's Christian in nature anyways, right? It's a standing in opposition of Christianity, not in opposition of everything. So secular in the West simply means not Christian, which means it's connected to Christianity.
It's defined by the Christianity that is not.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Secularism really doesn't exist. Secularism.
If you think of like a cradle atheist, they wouldn't say, "Oh, I'm secular. I listen to secular music." It's very much a Christian idea.
It's Christian. Right, it's a Christian idea. Jewish people don't have that narrative. Muslim people don't even have that idea of secular. They call things what they are. You're Christian, or you're Jewish, or you're Hindu, but secular is simply this idea of anything that is not Christian. I reject Christianity, which is standing in a space where your entire framework is I reject Christianity is not precisely healthy. I'm just going to throw that out there. But just saying that. A good book for that? I have books for everything. Dominion by Tom Holland, not the actor. It's a good book.
He fits right in.
By Tom Holland. Okay.
Yeah, Dominion.
In between Spider-Mans, he wrote
wow,
Dominion.
Spider-Man, right?
He's like, since he started going out with Zendaya, he just started getting really into a lot of different ideologies.
I love that for him.
Back to these, like, binary. Yes, see, the dualism of Christianity is a gift that we have because of Greek culture, and this dualism of, good and bad, there are good gods and bad gods, and even the narratives, like, the way in which Satan came to be, the way in which Satan became the thing that Satan is now, it just requires a lot of explanation, and I don't want to go into all of the explanation, but this idea that Satan is this bad force in the world, and there is this good force in the world. All of that is borrowed from, a lot of people say from Zoroastrianism, though there is not a lot of evidence of that, but there could be evidence of that, but it's really more Greek and Roman ideologies and views of the world. And so that dualism is hegemonic. Because it's not a Christian dualism, right? It's Christianity, and it's hegemonic in the world. And it demands that we see everything in black and white, good or bad, you're with me or against me. So when Jesus says, you're either with me or against me, they see it in dualistic ways, even though Jesus was not talking about dualism. When Jesus says things like, I am the way, the truth, and the life, people are like, oh, it's either that way or there is no other way. That's not what Jesus was saying, because Jewish people don't think in dualistic ways, or at least Jewish people back then. Not all Jewish people think in dualistic ways, I should say, because there are some that do. And so people that are immersed in all of these things and leave the religion that was given to them, but don't consider the ways in which this religion wired their brain to think in dualistic ways, say, okay, then I am now with the good guys, and the good guys are the opposite of what I left. Because if supremacy is good at anything, it's convincing people that they are either good or bad, and they better distance themselves from anything that could be bad, which makes accountability impossible. But that's another story. Because if you think you're good, you're going to defend your goodness over anything else, even over your accountability. So,
good
say,
Christians.
Okay, if I am not an evangelical Christian anymore, and I thought I was good when I was an evangelical Christian, but I realized that they are bad, so I'm going to leave evangelicalism. Well, now I'm going to be a progressive Christian, and these are the good guys. Now these are the good guys. And if I leave them, then I have to be all Christians are bad, and I'm going to be secular now, and I'm the good guy. And there is always this dualism of I have to be in the camp where they're the good guys. But there is no such thing. We're all a fucking mess. Can I curse here? Because I curse a lot.
Go for it.
You can most certainly curse. Yes.
I could. I figured I could. But we're all a fucking mess. And we are all capable of incredible beauty and goodness and amazing love and compassion and empathy. And also we are incredibly talented at dehumanizing and harming and abusing and, and seeing people as less than. We can be all of those things. And so I don't identify as a progressive Christian because there are a lot of progressive spaces where I feel absolutely uncomfortable and where I feel like I don't belong whatsoever. And I also hate that I want to be boxed again. People are like, we're going to go ahead and box you. And I'm like, but see, there are days that I'm not even a Christian. There are days that I am not a woman. There are days that I wake up and I am not any of those things that you want to box me into. There are days that I say, like, to hell with all religion. And then the next day I'm like, no, religion is so beautiful. We can use this thing. And I get to move at the pace that I am moving. And I get to be my own self. And I don't have to be boxed. And therefore, any community that I create, any community that I want to participate in, has to let me be completely me and not demand that I fit into binaries. Because I will never fit into your binaries. I will never. The moment that we start fitting into binaries, what we are fighting for is belonging. And when you're fighting for belonging that is external of you, you stop being someone that is authentic to who you are, and you stop being someone that I can trust. Because if you are desperate for belonging, you're going to betray me if I challenge that belonging.
Wow.
And you're not going to have the ability to look at me and tell me you're hurting me or anything. You'll just betray me because belonging comes from outside of you. I don't have to belong into progressive spaces or evangelical spaces or white spaces or any spaces. I belong wherever people say you get to be. Just be. You get to be you. I was at a friend's having lunch today. They invited me over. They live like 30 minutes outside of San Diego. And these friends are the type of people that they were like, we want to serve you. Like, we just want to make dinner. You've had a long few months and we want to just make sure that you're doing great. And these are the type of friends that I spent most of the time in their house, not cleaning, not making sure that I looked presentable, that I did the right thing, that I even took care of my kids. I spent it in their backyard laying on their hammock. And I knew there was no judgment for me. I knew that they knew that I was there because I needed it. I needed to be out there. You know, those are the type of spaces and the type of people that I want to be around. People that are like, hey, and if they need help, I know they'll come out and be like, dude, we need your help. I'll be like, cool, I'll come in. But I don't have to be perfect mom. I don't have to be all put together. I don't have to be, great hostess or great invited friend, or I don't have to be anything. I get to be Jo. And when you put people in these two, you have to be if you're a Christian, this is what you are, and I'm going to define you. Or if you're a Jewish person, or if you are gay, or if you are a woman, or if you are an immigrant, if we continue to demand that people fit into the boxes that have been created for us, then we continue to be oppressive, even if we are secular, whatever that means. People just get to be. And if we are not curious enough to meet individuals as individuals, then we are really missing out on a lot of beauty that people get to bring into the world. So you can tell when people are meeting you with curiosity versus, these like, where do I put you? In which box do you belong? And I'm like, if you meet me with curiosity, you realize that I am not a square, and you cannot fit me into any boxes. In fact, my body changes shapes every 3 or 4 hours. So that's why I cannot fit into the progressive or evangelical. There are a lot of evangelical ideologies that I still think, that's kind of pretty. But I don't say that out loud mostly because people freak out. But I can find beauty anywhere. If you're curious enough, you can. And you can also find oppression anywhere, including within you, if you're curious enough.
I wish everyone could hear that message. That's great.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point about sort of, trying to put people in a box, because it's very much what you're taught as a Christian, right? You can't be friends with people who aren't also Christians, or at least evangelicals. You can't be friends with people who aren't also evangelicals because they need to be saved, or you're going to be like unequally yoked. And I know that's usually used in relational terms. But it's the same principles apply to friendship. You don't feel like you can sort of trust them or be yourself, and you can't accept them for who they are. You can't accept their whole person. You're only trying to get them to convert. Now that's just if they're like white, able-bodied, and straight, right? Because I know specifically, I had no idea how to be friends with anyone in the queer community. And I had lost friends because someone told me they were bisexual, and I was so deeply uncomfortable and scared and didn't know what to do, because I spent my whole life only being told one narrative, that this is bad and it needs to change and you shouldn't accept that sin. And so when someone tells you that, it's no excuse to be a dipshit, but I was a dipshit because I didn't have any frame of reference for that, or any tools, or anything. And now obviously I don't need tools, because I just oh, cool, great, good for you, sounds like fun. And it doesn't matter to it doesn't impact me in any way, except for that I know more about this person, and that's great.
Yeah. You tweeted about that this week, which led to a really good conversation, about how Christians are only meeting people for the purpose of converting them.
Yeah.
And that is now relationships.
Christians they're not taught to make friends, they're taught to make converts. And that's really it. And it stunts people. The response that I got to that tweet was really sad in a lot of ways, and a really interesting conversation as well. But so many people just said I don't know how to make friends. Like, I've had to relearn how to make friends. Like, I feel like everybody's a project, and even though I've changed and I don't want to convert anyone or do anything, like, it's still incredibly difficult to then just accept people as they are, not for any other reason except for that I was never taught how to do it, right? I think you don't realize how many social skills you lose when you grow up in a very insular religion. And leaving even that aside, so I don't think we talk enough about how ableist white evangelical Christianity is.
We don't.
Growing up in it, there was a woman she was a girl, a teenager, and is now a woman, who was in a wheelchair. I don't think she ever had use of her legs, if I'm remembering correctly. And I cannot tell you the number of times they prayed for her miraculous healing. They brought her up on stage, prayed for her healing at every conference. And there were times when they tried to help her to stand up. And it's just as far as I know, she's still a Christian. I don't know how she feels about it. But can you imagine? I can't, as someone who's able-bodied, just the absolute shame and just I would imagine even sort of feelings of maybe I'm unworthy of being healed, right? Like maybe something.
I've heard so many stories about that from disabled people, specifically saying that they were grown up and told to be shameful of it, and that they weren't believing hard enough, and that's why they're still going through these things. And if they just had more faith, then they could grow out of it or change or whatever it be. It's so hard.
There was a woman at my church growing up who had 2 sons, and she married a man at my church, and shortly thereafter she was diagnosed with cancer. And it was incredibly sad, obviously. So naturally, we all prayed for her all the time. They were always brought her up on stage, prayed for her because apparently that's the thing to do. And she passed away. At her funeral, they were praying over her dead body that she would resurrect.
Ugh.
And effectively the message that they were giving was that we just have to have enough faith, right? God wants to do it. We just have to have enough, whatever, however you quantify faith, collective faith. And I have still not gotten over how incredibly traumatic that must have been for her sons. Whether or not they actually bought into the religion, I'm not really sure. But just that entire experience had to be you're not being allowed to grieve for your mother at her funeral, right? It's a show, it's this weird show. And I get that the pastors probably had good intentions, but it's just so, there's no self-awareness. None.
And it doesn't
whatsoever.
have to be that crazy either. There's so many pastors who use funerals as a come to Jesus conversion moment where they'll be up there giving a sermon about,
weddings.
This is how you get to heaven
and weddings.
And weddings. And that's, but I mean, weddings, okay, cool, yada, yada, I get it.
Oh.
But a funeral is a place to win souls. You are you're praying on people in their most vulnerable moments when they are broken and when they are down, and you're trying to use that to shove your way in. And that's just so gross.
My boyfriend killed himself, and they did the same thing at his funeral.
Ugh.
Can you imagine?
I think this, now that you guys are mentioning this, I think it'd be a really fascinating episode for us to do one on praying for miracles and ableism in the church. I think we all probably have some really powerful stories there in general.
Yeah, sorry, I sort of hijacked that part of the conversation.
It's fine. No, but it connects to everything that we're saying, because this toxic religion, it actually demands that we dissociate from all of our emotions. That includes grief, obviously. That includes all emotions. You have to dissociate from all of your emotions. All emotions are considered bad emotions because you have to dissociate from your own body. Because the only way that you can continue to be manipulated and groomed in order to be able to get you to accept the oppression that you are being put under is to get you to dissociate, to get you to not think all the time, to get you to not consider the ways in which you are feeling. Because if you sit down for just a minute to think about all of the ways in which you're feeling, then you run fast. So it's actually a default of the system. It's a default of the system to get people to dissociate. And when you dissociate from emotions happen in the same part of the brain. You cannot dissociate from some emotions but then keep all the other emotions. That's why I argue that inside of toxic Christianity, people don't mature, because you can't. You can't. People are kept immature, and one of the markers of immaturity is that you're looking outward for a savior, for somebody to come and save you. And what is the entire narrative of toxic Christianity? Jesus is here to save you. Just pray. Just pray, which is toxic Christianity, which is toxic positivity, which is a spiritual bypassing. And it keeps you immature, because if you're immature enough, then they can keep you dependent on them. And any narrative that can make you independent, that can make you interdependent, really, and that can make you have a healthy relationship with your emotions, becomes then a threat to the power that these corporations, what I call them, have over you. So it's not something that they do, and I don't think they are fully conscious of what they are doing, but the idea of dissociating you from your emotions, of saying, I know that you're going through grief, I know that you were told that you had cancer, but don't worry, just pray and God will be good. All of those causes you to have a very unhealthy relationship with your own emotions, to dissociate from your emotions, and therefore be easily manipulated.
I mean, I was telling someone this the other day that my OCD wasn't diagnosed until I was damn near 30, because I was taught that that OCD impulse. First of all, you're partially trained because you're taught you need to confess all the time in order to make sure you're forgiven. I mean, I was told that if you sinned and then you didn't ask for forgiveness and then you died,
when you die, straight to hell.
You die straight to hell, basically. So constantly making these confessions. And that spills over into other aspects of your life. And this need to keep doing things was seen as almost virtuous, right? And it's so long as it manifested in ways that were beneficial to, or in ways that made the religion look good, right? So if you're an OCD confessor, then that's great. You're super holy. When in reality, I needed therapy because my OCD was a result of pretty severe childhood trauma. And instead it was oh, this is great, and you just need to pray because you're under attack from the devil and these other ways. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, that's it's scrupulosity. I'm sure that you know, but it's very, very common with people that are inside of Christianity, toxic Christian spaces. This psychological disorder that you are obsessed with guilt and shame and religious laws, and so it's OCD. It turns into this OCD. I have a friend that she's convinced she would not have it if it weren't for the way that she was raised, with this obsession, pathological obsession with guilt and shame and sin and et cetera, et cetera.
So
I'd never heard that word until right now, and I just looked it up. That's fascinating. It explains a lot of people I speak to who are just getting through, religious trauma, and they still can't break that pattern. Even though they don't believe in the religion, it's really hard to get out of that guilt and shame that has been so built into the way that you view everything.
That's the thing. People leave toxic spaces or they become aware of different oppressive ideologies, but they don't realize that those are hardwired into your brain. Your brain has pathways, and the pathways of your brain are racist, and they are ableist, and they are homophobic, and they are fatphobic, and they are anti-Semitic and xenophobic, and they are Islamophobic. So you have to quite literally do the active, conscious, aware work of becoming, of rewiring your brain, of creating new pathways in your brain. And that is really hard work. So when people talk about deconstruction, they are like, yeah, I love the church and I can do whatever I want. That's not deconstruction in my opinion. In my opinion, deconstruction requires the rewiring of your brain. And if you're not doing the active work of rewiring your brain so you stop being all of the things that you've been conditioned to be, you just it's what I call dropping one weapon and then grabbing the next weapon. And harm will continue to be done no matter what ideology or what camp you decide to align with now.
Sure.
So it sounds like, regardless of our religious affiliations, the notion of liberation is important. If we have left Christianity, perhaps learning about liberation and liberation theology could be useful. If we are still within Christianity, learning about liberation and liberation theology could be useful. If you were to give like 1 or 2 books, or 3, you pick, on a starting place of liberation theology for people that might be listening, like, where would you recommend people start?
Let's see. You know what? It's really hard because there are books that are not precisely about liberation theology that I think are very helpful if people are interested in understanding. I don't know. I feel like Octavia Butler, anything by Octavia Butler is going to be just so incredibly deep and good, and it's going to start having, like, opening up your brain to ideologies of liberation in ways that you probably have never thought about. I think that reading, there's just so many, I can't. Okay, this is a really good book, but it's not precisely about liberation. It's about spiritual activism, which touches into why do we do liberation. So it's Rachel Ricketts, Do Better, and it's a spiritual activism, and how the fighting against oppression, the fighting against oppression is really a spiritual endeavor, and so that's why she calls it spiritual activism. So that was a good one. Honestly, I'm Still Here is a good one too, and that's not necessarily. And James Cone, if you read anything by James Cone, you're going to be just amazed. Gustavo Gutierrez,
Crossing the Lynching Tree, just all those.
And be aware that all of these, again, we can all cause harm and we can all do good. A lot of liberation theology, because it was being led mostly by men, has a lot of misogyny still in it. Because it was being led by Christians without the input of any other people, it has a lot of anti-Semitism in it too, which most Christianity is just rife with anti-Semitism. So considering those things, there are some Black theologians that have beautiful things to say about the liberation of Black people and that are queerphobic. And so, we get to hold the complexities of all of that, and we get to understand that people have frameworks themselves too, and they can only see but as far as their oppression takes them, right? We can only see as far as oppression takes us.
May I, I've had this one sitting out for a while, and I'm slowly going through it. It's Mujerista Theology by Ada Maria Sassi Diaz. It's just so Mujerista Theology is, amongst other things, a womanist critique of Latin American liberation theology, amongst many other things. That's a great book. It's called Mujerista Theology. We can leave that in the show notes for y'all.
I think you're going to have to spell that one.
I would put all of these in the show notes.
Yeah. Mujerista. It's Spanish. Mujerista.
Yeah.
Ada Maria Sassi Diaz. So, first and foremost, Jo, would you ever want to come back? We'd love to have you again.
Of course, anytime.
Perfect. And is there how can people find you if they want to hear more from what you have to say and hear more of you on the regular?
So the social media is a great place to find me. Twitter is probably the platform where I am the most active, and then Instagram is the second one, and then I make videos on TikTok, and I'm still trying to understand TikTok. It's confusing to me sometimes. And I also think that there was so much going on TikTok for the last few months that I needed a break. I was like, okay, why is everyone losing their mind on this platform? But that's not here nor there. Any social media platform, you can find me there, and I am pretty good at engaging and trying to see my interest is not to be an influencer or to be a creator that is just like out there. I really am interested in creating communities online for people that do not have that option in their personal life, like in their, in their offline life. And I believe that because it was for me, social media was the first place where I started finding people when I was still inside of the evangelical church and I was feeling like, and I don't say this hyperbolically, I say this literally, I felt like I was going crazy. I felt like my entire world was crumbling. I felt like I was literally losing my mind, and anything that I had been told, anything that I had believed was a lie. and I felt like I'm living in an alternate reality, and I'm going crazy. I'm literally going crazy. And I started finding people online, and I realized that I wasn't crazy at all, and that there were all these other wonderful people that were asking the same questions, having the same, and actually taking them further and blowing my mind. I had to unfollow people and refollow them 73 times in 2013 because it was like, oh my God, you're freaking me out. You're freaking me out. And so that's my intent, like on social media. So if you want to, I call it my online living room. So that's how I engage. You're coming over, you're hanging out in my living room. Take your shoes off and don't hold me like accountable for the pile of dirty laundry in the corner.
Cute.
Actually, help me fold it.
Help me fold it.
Like,
Now,
do this.
as a consistent reminder as well, the great queen of heathens, where can everyone find you?
Hell. No, you can Twitter, which is now hell. No, sorry. Okay, so you can find me on TikTok, Queen of the Heathens. You can find me on Twitter, Queen of Heathens. The O is a 0. You can find me on Instagram, and as of now, you can find me on a whole bunch of YouTube channels because I have been all over and will continue to be all over. I try to post those on Facebook and other places that I can link. Yeah.
Brad?
Jegaysus?
You can find me at your mom's house.
I love that, you know, that way I feel like I answered really poorly now. Can I have a redo?
Sorry.
I was just inspired by the hell comment, I think. Yeah, you can find me pretty much anywhere where my name is Jegaysus on the, YouTube, the Twitter, the Instagram, the TikTok. But that's pretty much it, straightforward. I do want to say, too, if anyone is out there listening, I know a lot of people do listen on our podcast platforms. If you ever want to come by to the YouTube channel, it is just the same name, Unholy Trini-tea, Trini-tea. And yeah, if you don't want to, no worries. But if you wanted to see our beautiful glasses, I just thought I should throw that out there because we do have a very good, strong, supportive people over there in the podcast land. And also, while you're there, if you're listening in podcast land, please rate. That is the best way. Spotify now has ratings too. So Apple and Spotify are the ones where I guess we rely on your stars. So that would be much appreciated.
Give us
but
your
as
stars.
always, we thank you for listening. Yeah, give us your stars.
And
then over to Andrew. Where do we find
Andrew?
Andrew?
And I'm Red Sage, so red_sage1 on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and I'm pretty sure that's it right now, unless someone's impersonating me. So that's the only places. So we are thrilled you joined us for this episode, and we will
Yes,
definitely
thank
have
you.
you go back and talk more
Thank
about
you.
oppression, liberation, and I don't know, fun glasses.
Yes, that sounds great. I'm up for it.
Thank you.
Perfect.
I
Thank you so
enjoyed
much.
that so
I love
much.
you.
Yeah.
You are a shiny
Thank you,
light.
everyone. All right. Bye.
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 The end. Okay. That was fun.